Thanks for joining us today for Think Big with Michael Zellner, sponsored by Sleepy Z's Masonry. Joining me today for episode 177 for part two of my interview series with him is Richie McGinniss. In case you missed or haven't watched or listened to our part one podcast, Richie's journey into the national spotlight really began on August 25th, 2020. Actually, the international spotlight, too. He was chief video editor, director for the Daily Caller, which was founded by Tucker Carlson. And I found out in doing some more research that he actually built his studio by hand for just like $2,000.
Yeah, I literally got a massive splinter in the back of my head while I was building it.
I can imagine us all it. He found himself in the middle of the craziness and chaos that night in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Just minutes before the shooting began, he had interviewed Kyle Rittenhouse in front of a gas station. A little bit after that, his life changed forever, and he's here today to tell us about his experience that night. Also, his experience involvement in the death of George Floyd with the Proud Boys in Seattle's Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, faced off with the Umbrella Gang and MIPD in New York City protests in front of City Hall, and also in Portland when there was a clash between demonstrators and federal officers. A lot of that we're going to be talking about today. It's also talking about his new book that was just recently released. And I have a copy of it right here that I bought.
Oh, yeah.
Riot Diet, One Man's Radical Ride Through American Chaos by Richie McGinniss. I'm about halfway through it, and I can tell you, I'm like, it's hard to put down. It's that good. I was like, I didn't want to do the Kindle because I like to read, but it is available on both, so which is awesome. A little bit after we recorded our first podcast about a month ago, Richie, I was in my car driving and listening to Megyn Kelly, and all of a sudden Megyn Kelly says, next up is Richie McGinniss. And I happened just to be listening at the right time. It was about 12:30 Central Time. Megyn Kelly, as everyone knows, used to be a Fox News, had one of the top shows on Fox News, then switched to NBC, and then went out on her own. And she now has one of the top podcasts in the country. So to be able to get on that podcast and tell your story is pretty amazing. What was that experience like for you?
The Megyn Kelly experience?
Yeah.
Well, so it's interesting because actually the second book, which covers everything from Proud Boys rally in September after Kenosha to January 6th through Joe Biden's inauguration, I mentioned Megyn Kelly in one of the chapters because we interviewed her, my coworker Shelby Talcott, who was covering all the riots with me. She interviewed her. I set up the cameras in Megyn's apartment right when she was starting that podcast.
Oh, wow.
And so it's this moment where, number one, the reasons why she left NBC were ridiculous. I mean,
Sure.
she didn't wear blackface. She said that a woman who used bronzer to dress up like Diana Ross, some reality TV star, that, she didn't think it was that bad to use bronzer. And that's what got her kicked out. It was during all the media stuff. Everybody was apoplectic.
Ridiculous. Yeah.
But just the mere fact that we were in Megyn's own apartment as she started this new venture into new media was symbolic of what I'm trying to do with the book, which is, it's our turn to speak up for what we really think and not rely on these corporate entities to referee our speech and tell us what we can and can't say. So Megyn, I was first put in touch with her through that, but then actually I did my first appearance on her show right after I wrote an op-ed about Kyle Rittenhouse. The headline being Kyle Rittenhouse is not a hero. He's also not a white supremacist.
Right.
And that was back in September of 22. And, the thesis of the piece was actually, that if you stand in the middle, if you're not on this side of that, being with Kenosha, Kyle Rittenhouse is a hero or a white supremacist. If you have a take that's anywhere in between those two extremes, then you're going to get blasted by both the left and the right. And the thesis of the piece was proven by the response. I lost like thousands of followers. I got a lot of hate, even some threats through messages. But Megyn, I think she definitely comes from the conservative side, but she's open-minded to having different points on. And so when I came out with the book, I thought she was at the top of my list. and they were kind enough to have me on again. And I'll be honest, like, you always look back on interviews, think I should have said this and that, but that was the most nervous I've been for an interview, just because there's, I have the book riding on the line, got to feed my family with the book. And I was pretty nervous. It's the most nervous I've been since I did Tucker Carlson in front of 5 million people live, that literally within 20 hours of witnessing the shooting in Kenosha, running no sleep whatsoever. So it was a good experience. I mean, I always love talking to people from all across the spectrum and hearing their different versions and understandings of what I wrote. And so Megan, yeah, it was a great conversation, and I was very honored to be on there. That was record sales after I went on, that's for sure.
That's awesome. And what I love about her now doing a podcast and not be, scrutinized and analyzed by either Fox or NBC is that she says whatever the hell she wants to say now.
Really does. Yeah.
And she's very blunt. Yeah.
Even if you don't agree with everything she says, the authenticity is the new currency in the discourse. And that's part of why I started my own publishing company, Pigeon Press, for the publishing of this book, because I realized, the moment I decided I was going to do it on my own, I realized that I went back and really sharpened my pencil of like, wait, what do I really think? Not what I think a publisher wants to see or an agent wants to see, but what do I really think? And that's, I think, the most important thing is to hold on to your authenticity and not sacrifice that for some big deal or whatever.
And I'm sure you had offers from other people, but I guess you were afraid that a lot of it would be taken out, stuff that you definitely wanted in the book.
Yeah, well, I got interest, and all the publishers, whether they came from the left or the right, told me I need to pick a side to sell books. And even the conservative ones back in 2022, when I was first starting the process, told me that Trump wasn't going to make it through the primary process, and it was old news. And I just knew that that wasn't the case. And, I wrote both of these books, the first one and the second one, with the expectation that there would be a referendum on the Biden presidency, just watching the way that it was going as I was writing the book. So, I think it's actually for the best that it took me a while to write the books. I mean, they're quite long, as you're learning, and there's a lot in there. But I also, I did video and media for 8-10 years before I was like, okay, I guess I got to write a book. And I hadn't written anything since college.
Right.
Philosophy paper on the role morality of bartending. And so I got Anthony Swaffer, the author of Jarhead, on as my editor just through serendipity. My cousin got drunk with him at a writing conference 20 years ago. And synchronicity would have it that, Swafford was the first person after I talked to all these publishers and agents telling me to pick a side. And he was just like, I believe in what you're doing. And once I had him, I was like, what do you really get from a publisher? You get marketing and you get a good editor. And so I had the good editor. I have some media contacts. And, like with Megyn Kelly, I just kind of took the leap and said, I'm going to do it on my own. And yeah, I mean, everything's so far so good. It's just, you got to just keep grinding. And it's been interesting to see, what makes for sales and what doesn't. And it's tough in this media environment to sell something like that. That's not just, Orange Man bad or Orange Man the best man ever.
Right.
But, with that being said, I think people are actually more receptive than the corporate entities like the news companies and the big publishers would give credit to. I think Americans are more independently minded than, the powers that be might think.
I agree. 100% agree. And I think that a lot of the people in the media did not really understand Americans in the last 4 years and what they were thinking, and just get tired of watching the mainstream media. A lot of them just constantly just lying to them all the time.
Yeah. And look at how Trump won. I mean, he really got all of his biggest press hits from places like Joe Rogan and Theo Von, of all people. I mean, if you had told me, I knew that Trump was going to make his comeback, but if you had told me that he was going to go on Theo Von's podcast and they'd be talking about like doing cocaine, like that's just surreal, just goes to show that reality is stranger than fiction these days.
Yeah, I totally agree. How has your, very near-death experience that you had that night in Kenosha, Wisconsin, how has it influenced your perspective on reporting and storytelling and change your overall life in general?
Well, definitely made me realize that before then, it was like, especially Portland, it was like such a spectacle that it kind of felt like, you know, a contact sport. Like you were going out there and it was like fun, you had tear gas and flashbangs going off and people were acting crazy. And that was the moment where I realized that this stuff is real and that real lives are impacted by these power vacuums and these situations that were created by political gamesmanship. And so just on like a professional level, it caused me to go into my process of reporting on the ground and also writing about it after the fact with a little bit more, I guess, trying to look deeper than just, who the good guys and the bad guys are to make everybody feel nice about what happened, whatever tragedy it was. And personally, I definitely, it brought me back to the spiritual side of things. And without giving too much away, I did get baptized in 2023. And
Nice.
that was part of my spiritual journey, crawling out of the chaos. But, that's really, I think the first book is just pure chaos. And the second book, after January 6th, it was time to pick up the pieces. I thought that all the madness was going to stop after the election. I was obviously way wrong.
Right.
That whole process, that's included in it's really, it's a sequel and it's certainly a mirror image of the BLM stuff, which is the MAGA side descending into chaos and ultimately turning their backs on the enforcers of the institutions that they feel betrayed them, namely the police, the Capitol Police in this case.
Right.
But it took a while writing the book to take all those thousands of videos and like piece together some semblance of significance and meaning, not only for the country from what I witnessed, but also for myself. And so, yeah, I think, the readers will definitely probably finish part one asking where it goes because, after Kenosha, like, things were still crazy through the entire election. But I really wrote it as two books just because the Trump stuff was the perfect sequel. And there was just so much in there anyways. People aren't going to buy a massive book. And I tried with my editors to cut it down, but as you
Right.
know, there's a
Yeah.
lot of stuff in there.
Yeah. I didn't realize it was as many pages as it was. I think I'm on page about 190.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So you got
So
into a little bit of pepper spray and whatnot.
yes. Yes. Got I see. Yeah, the pepper spray chapter.
Yeah, it gets,
Uh,
yeah, it's going to get, you might want the helmet for the next couple chapters,
yeah.
especially
I'm
once.
excited. I take about 15 to 20 minutes every night laying in bed and been
Mhm.
reading it. And I do it that way. And then, I'm ready to go to bed. But it's not because of the book. It's just, it makes me tired to read. And it's the perfect time because it's quiet.
Yeah. And I love, that's why I was so determined to make sure that the product was good in paper form, because I do think, I mean, in the author's note at the beginning, I'm like, put your phone down, pick the book up. And I think it's me reflecting on the superficiality of our discourse and reading it in paper form. It's like kind of, the reader's doing the same thing.
Right. What if some of the people closest to you, either friends or family, or maybe people that knew you went through some of this stuff, but maybe not to the extent
Mhm.
until they've read the book? What has some of the
Yeah.
response been like?
Well, my own mom was like my number one editor. Like she'd go through all my stuff right when I got it before I sent it to Anthony Swafford. And she got to the end and now she's through. I finished the second book as well. So she's gotten through both. And she's like, I can't believe that you didn't tell me all this crazy stuff that was going on. I'm like, of course I didn't tell you. Would have
Right.
just been more worried.
Yeah.
And I do have friends from home who've told me like, I feel like you're talking to me. And that for me is the greatest compliment that you can get because
That's
like I was saying earlier with authenticity, it took a really long time and a lot of hard work and hundreds of drafts to find my voice in the form of writing. And I think, that it's hard to do in this day and age because you have such a weight and a force behind the two different sets of narratives that are coming out of all these national events and political events that it's hard to like just separate yourself from that and separate your own viewpoints from the ones that you've been fed.
right.
And so, that took a while, but I appreciate that my friends say that because that was really my chief focus. And the whole thing was like, this needs to sound like me because I'm gonna have to live with this once it's published for the rest of my life.
Right. As we're recording this yesterday, Daniel Penny was found not guilty in New York in the, trial, the subway trial with the
Yeah.
chokehold and everything. And then all of a sudden I see, one of a guy who was, I guess, with the national BLM.
Oh yeah.
And, and, and I forget the guy's name, but I mean, just talking about being vigilantes and going out there and doing crazy things. And it just makes you worry. I mean, because there's people like that if they don't get the verdict they want, it's always be a vigilante. It's always about racism. Sometimes it is racism, but it's not always about racism. And they're just stirring the pot, and it's scary.
And the irony there being that Kyle Rittenhouse was the most terrible person in the world, according to those same people, for the reasons that he was acting as a vigilante in their eyes.
Right.
And so it's, and there's the same kind of weird flip side with the shooter of United Healthcare with which we're finding out was probably an assassination. You have a lot of people from those same areas, like, saying, okay, good. Yeah. It's time we take matters into our own hands. And
even Taylor Lorenz said it. I mean,
I know I did not have that on my bingo card. No.
Yeah, Vox dropped her.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, just insane.
I mean, and that's the thing that I'm trying to get across in the book is the difference between seeing these things from pixels on a screen and then opining with your, totally hot take about whatever happened in that chaotic situation that Daniel Penny was in, for example, and saying, oh, I would have done this or I would have done that, or this is right and this is wrong. And they don't realize how quickly things unravel and how difficult it can be to keep your wits about you in those kinds of situations.
Yeah, I couldn't even imagine. I mean, in that situation, but I mean, in my opinion, obviously no one wanted that guy to die, but obviously no one knew he was schizophrenic and had all the problems. And when he was doing what he was doing, Daniel Penny was trying to save people's lives. And that's just how I feel about it. And unfortunately what happened. But I think the verdict was correct.
Yeah, the main thing I had to say after something like that, having gone through the Rittenhouse trial, is that in reality is just not so tidy, and you can't just put everybody and everything into a box. And it might not be the easiest route to coming to understand why something like that happens or what it means after the fact, but it's you're doing a disservice to, I think, the entire conversation if you're taking that knee-jerk reaction and not looking at the facts. I mean, with Daniel Penny, the video didn't start until later, after the actual initial confrontation took place, when people, he was subdued and people realized that they were safe. And the same thing in Kenosha with the shooting of Jacob Blake by police, which started off the whole thing. The video of that started after the police tased him twice. And so the clip that you see is just the shooting, but you don't see the run up to his struggle against police, trying to get into a car while, according to police, armed with a knife and with his kids in the car with a outstanding arrest warrant. So, that whole bigger context was totally lost. And that's the reason why Kenosha burned in the first place. And then the Kyle Rittenhouse shooting was, totally stuff taken out of context. And everybody, I was just absolutely amazed. Like, I remember, and I go through this in the book without giving too much away. I read a Vice News article the morning after the shooting, and that was when I decided I had to go on the airwaves and, get my account out there. They said that Kyle Rittenhouse opened fire on the crowd. And that's just such a misrepresentation of even a cursory glance of the video that came out of there, which was available within hours of it taking place, would have revealed that that's just an outright lie.
Right. Given your experiences, how do you view the relationship between media coverage and public perception, during events like that in Kenosha? And do you think that media narratives shape reality or reflect it?
Yeah. Well, within the context of 2020 to 21, and I think even still rings true today, I think it's more that it shapes people's reality. And I had the amount of people after the trial who came up to me and said, oh, I didn't even realize that the guys that he shot were white and that they weren't black.
Right.
That just goes to show the way in which, if your news feed is only coming from one side, you're only going to get half the picture. And, it's even the story of my struggle to get my version, which was the closest version. I was the closest person to the first shooting.
Right.
I had to battle to get onto CNN. And the only reason I was able to get on there is in all likelihood because of the fact that they took my words out of context when I appeared on Tucker Carlson in the first place. And so my battle, like I take the reader through specifically what I said in the emails, who I contacted, how I was able to correct the record. And that just tells you right there, like how hard it is, even for the people who were right there, to get the word out about what, the objective observations were from on the ground, rather than these kind of warped versions of the events that you get through your social media feeds and through your cable news shows.
Yeah, and people wonder now. I mean, since November 5th, MSNBC and CNN's viewership
Yeah.
is almost,
Yep.
I mean, gone in half.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of it is people are tired of being misled
Yeah.
and lied to, and just seeing certain clips and not seeing an entire clip. And it goes back to me, and we might have mentioned this on the last podcast. With Trump in 2017, the good people on both sides.
Yes. Exactly.
And I thought he said it. And
Yeah.
so I went on and did my own research and found the clip of CNBC where he said it, but then he followed up, I'm not talking about
like literally immediately after.
Right. And I showed it to my mom, who used to have Trump derangement syndrome, and she doesn't love him, but now but she now is sort of like in the middle of it. Like, okay, the country needs to be successful.
Yeah.
And I showed her up until the point where he said it. And then I showed her the rest, and she said, I never saw that on TV. I go, right, because MSNBC and CNN, they didn't show it.
Mm-hmm. No, that's exactly right. And the extent to which the heels have been dug in on, like the Hunter Biden laptop, or Russian collusion, or classified document, it's just like the list is endless. Jussie Smollett, there's no, let's put it this way, the correction to the misstatement never gets a fraction of the views that the original incorrect statement got. So it's like once that toothpaste comes out of the tube, it doesn't go back in.
Yeah.
And so people, I think have this perception of Donald Trump that our media has led us to believe that he's either the savior of Western civilization or the Antichrist. And, it's like, this is no different than other times in American history. We've had warped and partisan media for a long time. I mean, I even cite in chapter 3 all the way back to Andrew Jackson.
Right.
But the difference now is that we have like things like cell phone video that really can, if people are willing to go out there and look for the truth, they can find it. So I think, in the longer scheme of things, we're, people are starting to realize and wake up to the absolute, just like detached from reality nature of these people who are sitting in their studios, the keyboard warriors of the world.
And all these people that go off on people like Joe Rogan and Elon Musk, I'm like, they used to be Democrats, guys.
Yeah.
They were Democrats, and they feel like the party left them. And I honestly think that Elon Musk buying Twitter, which, remember, he tried to get out of it, and then they forced him back into buying it.
Yeah.
And that he really, saved, I don't know if I want to use the word democracy, but he changed things, because it became a forum to where conservatives and liberals could both get their viewpoints out, and they wouldn't get taken off of there, if they were true. And if they were fact checked, they would have like they have readers' notes underneath them. But the liberals don't like that. They liked having that full, control over that. So now obviously they started Blue Sky.
Yeah.
But why not have it to where we can have conversations?
I know. And then that's the hope, is that we're getting some cross-pollination going. And that's always been my hope. I don't care if somebody wants to have me on to talk about my book. I'm not like, well, are you a lefty or are you a righty? Because I'm not going to do it if that's the case.
Sure.
Like, I'm an open book when it comes to that. I mean, I was on the ground talking to the Umbrella Gang, which, if they were Antifa, they're not willing to tell you, but they're wearing all black with gas masks in front of Portland.
Right.
courthouse, federal courthouse, and I talked to the Proud Boys. So like, why would it be if I can do that? Then it's a walk in the park comparatively to talk to the left or the right behind a camera. And I think uh, what I'll say about the censorship that took place during the 2016 and the 2020 election. I mean, running a video news business on Facebook and YouTube and Instagram during the Trump years at an Tucker Carlson founded anti-establishment news website. I mean, it was like playing with a weighted bat. The amount of times, I mean, we knew, and there's actually like leaked internal documents and whistleblowers who have revealed that our outlet was on a blacklist and that we were, targeted to be promoted, down, we wouldn't appear on people's feeds because of who founded the website, not based upon the veracity of the articles that we were publishing.
And that's why, I love it that these guys now, they can go and, and on their own channels and
Mhm.
now that, and, they're making so much money doing things on their own and they're able to get things out there. But if Elon Musk hadn't have done that, we wouldn't have known about, with Matt Taibbi and Barry
Yeah,
Weiss
the
and these
Twitter
people.
files is crazy.
I mean, and like, it's like, guys, no, it wasn't Elon that went in there and did all the research. He hired independent journalists to go in there that were sort of down the middle or more actually towards the left, that all of a sudden you find
Yeah,
out, all these lies and the 51 generals, and they knew about it. The FBI had it. And I'm like,
crazy.
he saved a lot of people. And now more information is able to get out. And I think he was talking about X is where most people go to get their news.
Hmm. Yeah, it definitely has, I think, well, definitely just in terms of numbers, it's become the number one news app in the world. But also, like that kind of behavior, we knew that it was happening at the time that, I mean, we were the second news outlet to get the Hunter Biden laptop after the New York Post. And, all of those posts on Facebook and every social media platform was, you couldn't talk about it. I mean, New York Post at the time that we had the laptop, they were still literally locked out of Twitter.
I know.
And if you read that original report, which I did, their bombshell email about uh, you know 10 points for the big guy. Going back and rereading that article and knowing what we know now, it's like, well, they claimed that it was Russian disinformation, and like you said, there were 51 intelligence officials who were corroborating that and promoting it, and it's like totally just absolutely woven out of nowhere.
Right.
This whole story.
Yeah. Um, in light of recent events surrounding protests, over Israel, Gaza, and the Palestinians over the last year or so on college campuses all across America, what do you think that the implications for democracy and civic engagement moving forward will be?
Yeah, I actually covered. I went viral. I haven't, I've been spending most of my time writing, but I went out for a protest. It was Netanyahu was addressing Congress, and I went out. I saw that pepper spray was deployed by Capitol Police on Twitter, and I just went a couple blocks from my house on Capitol Hill to check it out. And I couldn't believe there were like 5,000 people descending on Columbus statue in front of Union Station. And by this point, like I know the drill, like I know all the best elevated spots to go and get a good shot at those various locations. So I immediately climbed up the fountain, the Columbus Fountain, and I'm up there filming, and these people start spray painting right beneath me, and I just turned my camera downwards, and I was like, "Hey," and I published this footage. I'm like, "Hey, what are you guys doing spray painting?" Just asking, what are you guys trying to do here? And they're like, "Do you support Palestine?" And I'm like, "I support freedom of speech in the United States of America. I'm on a public street and I'm doing my job." And they're like, "But do you support Palestine?" And I'm like, "I support the United States of America." And then they started calling me a Zionist, screaming out. And that's like, that's a dangerous thing when you're in the middle of 5,000 people.
Absolutely.
Somebody's 4 or 5 people start pointing at you, screaming Zionist, Zionist. So I studied Arabic and I lived in the Middle East. So I started speaking to her in Arabic. She had an Arabic tattoo, and she didn't speak just to test her to see if she spoke Arabic, because she wasn't responding to me asking her questions in Arabic. I called her some bad names, and swearing in Arabic is really bad. Like anybody who knows even a small vocabulary in Arabic knows I won't say the word because it's like if you say it in the streets of an Arab country, like people are gonna say haram, haram, like which means that's not okay. That's you can't do that. And so, she didn't even speak Arabic. She had an Arabic tattoo, and she's willing to call me a Zionist simply for doing my job in a public street in the United States of America. And to see the way that things went down on college campuses, it's like it's crazy to me that we've gotten to this point now where not only people who are sporting, flags from the other side, your perceived enemies, but just people who are doing their job as journalists on the ground are targeted for not, it's like if you're at a protest, then you have to be for the cause, even if you're there covering it. And that's just a completely crazy notion to me. Like the whole point is that you're supposed to be, broadcast the footage, whether it's the protesters or the cops who are acting up, whether it's the left or the right. Like through the whole 2020 to 21, whether it was the Proud Boys beating up on somebody or it was the guys in front of the Portland courthouse throwing Molotov cocktails, like we're publishing it no matter what, or the cops beating up on them. Like we're publishing it because that's what happened. Right. And it's not a matter of like, okay, well, we're not, our audience won't really like to see this, so we're not going to publish it. It's like, no, you just put it out there. You were there, and just no matter peaceful, not so peaceful, put it up.
Yeah, and it's not Trump's fault that the Proud Boys beat up on somebody. It's not Biden's fault that the Portland people do what they do. I mean, these people are going to do whatever they want to do.
Yeah, and I mean, there's certainly an after action which I go through in the book of like, to what extent did the politicians set the stage for this kind of stuff to go down? Sure. And obviously, like, Trump was much more sympathetic to the guys on J6 than the ones throughout the BLM stuff, sure, and vice versa. So, to a certain extent, the way in which our political rhetoric has ramped up, I don't think that's purely Trump's fault. I mean, you just look at the way that the entire establishment press acted throughout the beginning of the Trump year, throughout Trump's first term, freaking out over things like covfefe.
Oh my God. It's amazing he got anything done.
Yeah. And that does a disservice to the entire process of the politicians the press holding the politicians, the powerful, to account. Because if you're apoplectic about absolutely every single thing, then when stuff actually needs to be called out, then nobody's going to pay attention. It's like the boy who cried wolf.
Right. Absolutely. Tell us a little bit about testifying at the Kyle Rittenhouse trial in November of 2021. Mm-hmm. You were questioned obviously by both the prosecution and the defense, and what you feel were the most important things that you were able to tell about that night, and try not to have, any kind of a personal agenda and be completely honest and fair.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're right. There were certain things that I saw and that I observed and experienced that were good for the defense, and certain things that were not so good. Right. So I was not only a key witness in the first shooting, but also a named victim. So when I saw Joseph Rosenbaum chase Rittenhouse, and when I saw Joseph Rosenbaum lunge for the front portion of Kyle's gun and Kyle dodge around and shoot, those observations were good for the defense to get him off on the charges of reckless homicide. With that being said, I was also a victim. I didn't ask to be named a victim. I told the police on the night of that I looked down when the shots went off and didn't see Rosenbaum collapse to the ground because I felt something go past my legs. And actually, it wasn't until the trial that the FBI footage, they had a Cessna up above with an infrared camera, that footage came out showing the heat signature of the bullet skipping off the ground in front of me. Wow. But when the defense wanted me to say that I wasn't afraid for my life in that moment, but I absolutely was. So I told the truth of when I was asked, yes, I was afraid in that moment. And it was possible in Wisconsin that he was acquitted of self-defense for shooting Joseph Rosenbaum, but still charged with reckless endangerment of my life, which carried a sentence of up to 12 years. So I was terrified, after I testified, and I think it was about 2 weeks after that the actual verdict came in. But I was terrified that, I knew that I had to say what I had to say because it was the truth. But I also knew that it was possible that he got acquitted and charged just because of me and thrown in jail just because of what I said, being afraid for my life. And so the only person who was happier than me after that verdict, I mean, in full honesty, like I was absolutely relieved by the fact that not that I, went into the trial trying to get him off,
Right.
but when I found out that I wouldn't have to be looking over my shoulders,
Yes.
I got plenty of threats during that whole process. And, you know, I realized that he was acquitted of all charges because they read my name, for the charges of reckless endangerment of Richard McGinniss, not guilty. And yeah, it was just like an amazing weight off my shoulders. And I actually didn't do any press for like a year after that because I didn't want to add fuel to the flames.
Smart.
Megyn Kelly was actually the first press appearance that I did, which was a year later. So, I'm now that the book is out, I'm much more open to talking about it. But it was crazy to see, Kyle's such a young kid, the way in which right wing media and media who is more sympathetic to Kyle really just like turned him into this kind of celebrity figure, but in a way that was not with his best interest at heart. Just, they wanted the clicks. And TPUSA did this big thing where they had pyrotechnics like less than a month after he was acquitted. They brought him out on stage. They were congratulating him. They were even joking about how good his aim was. And I was sitting there sick to my stomach,
Right.
watching, knowing that one of those guys he shot died in my arms, basically. And not that that guy, I learned after the fact that he was not a good person, but the same deal with the United Healthcare CEO or with Daniel Penny. It's like, just because somebody, was acquitted, it's that's not innocent. That's not guilty, right?
Right.
So innocence is different from not guilty, and there's a difference between being comfortable with something personally and whether or not you're guilty of something criminal, right?
Right.
So, after he won, everybody was celebrating him, but I'm like, why aren't conservatives asking why a 17-year-old kid why his parents let him out there in the first place?
Both sides can say some stupid shit sometimes.
Yeah, ain't that the truth?
Yeah, they really can. I mean, whether it's on Twitter or, X or, whatever, Facebook or, or even on television. I mean, both, can say things that you're just like, God, you probably shouldn't have said that.
Yeah, and I
Sure.
think and the right has become less conservative as far as like, oh, if they're down in the mud, I'm going to stay true to my principles, and I'm not going to engage in that kind of mudslinging. And the conservative, quote unquote conservative, Trump's party is not as overtly conservative as Reagan's, for example.
Right.
But the degree to which they've become reactionary rather than conservative is pretty eye opening. And yeah, Kenosha is a great example of that.
I don't know if you've seen Reagan. I watched Reagan about 2 weeks ago when I was walking
No, I
around.
haven't seen the movie yet. I got to check it out.
Great. Dennis Quaid did an
Yeah.
amazing job. And I was happy that they, brought out a lot of stuff in there. And they even brought out like the Iran Contra stuff
Mhm.
in there. And, and then his Alzheimer's toward the end,
Mhm.
which, so it definitely worth watching. And
Yeah, I'll check it out.
he did an amazing job. Great movie. So I know probably the answer to this, but what inspired you to write this book? I mean,
Mhm.
you've talked about, worrying about your safety and worrying about your family's safety. And now I know the trial's been over for a few years,
Mhm.
but there's still obviously, I'm sure there's times where you're like, I know I'm getting myself involved in
Yeah.
situations where
Yeah.
my safety, is a question. So what inspired you to decide just, hey, I'm just going to go for it. I'm doing this on my own, through my own publishing company and write the book?
Well, I guess there's two parts to the answer to that question. Like when I first started to decided to write the book was after January 6th. I could tell you the exact moment. It was like 9:30 p.m. I got home. It's covered in pepper spray still, and I sat down on my couch. And Sognick, who you used to see in chapter 3, who was my coworker and roommate at the time, he sat down next to me on the couch and he was like, "I guess that's the ending to your book." And I realized I was one of like just a handful of Americans who saw that scale, saw that breadth of unrest across the country at all these different locations on both the left and the right. And, I thought like 20 years from now, how are the history books going to write about this? And whenever you go to write a history book, the best sources are primary sources, people who were there and who are telling you what they experienced in their own words. And so I set out with the goal of writing it, like that, as a primary source of not just what happened, but what the experience itself was like, and why I aimed my camera where I did, and why I asked what I did, and how I felt about the way that things happened and the way that they were covered. And I guess that brings me to the second part of my answer, which is, once I got to the end of the process and I was shopping this thing around with the proposal and all that, I had reached out to a fairly prominent agent in the political realm, and I had waited a couple of weeks to hear back from them. And I have never said a prayer about my professional life. And I said a prayer, just, help me find a way to tell the truth and also provide for my family. And I literally, within moments of saying that prayer, I got an answer back from the agent saying, not even from the agent, from the agent's assistant. Didn't even have, the time, I guess, to respond to me himself, but saying that they didn't, they didn't want to take me on as a client. And that really I took as a sign that I just need to do it on my own. And that was when I started the publishing company, Pigeon Press. And yeah, after that, I was going through the editing process, and I was like, wait a second, like, this is a little bit round. I kind of rounded this out a little bit just to kind of, satisfy the powers that be. So what do I really think here? And re-examined it. And I think that the writing got a lot better after that.
Talking about January 6th just a little bit, the whole thing that ABC did was, it was a production, with the, all the people in there. And, and I know that, it's easy for me to be biased because, I am, a Trump supporter. I think that I know for sure he said peacefully and patriotically protest, and they never showed that.
Yeah.
But I also do think that he waited just a little bit too long to come out, and do a video and saying, hey, you need to stop it, even though he wasn't pushing his people to do that. I also have seen, government documentation that he did on a few different occasions request, asked them if they wanted, the 10,000 National Guard, and he was turned down on it. I think there's some people that, involved with January 6th who did some bad stuff, breaking the windows or pushing police. But a lot of it that I saw on video was the police opening doors and letting people just walk through. What's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, well, I guess I'll answer it in kind of sequence based on the points that you brought up.
Okay.
From, the first thought that I had when I got down there, I thought that things were going to pop off like around dark, like the previous two Stop the Steals had, when everybody started dispersing. There was no internet down there. So I had my whole team down there. I had to be able to communicate. So I was at my house in Georgetown, and I was running the live feed of Trump's speech. And I heard that there were cops running back and forth, and I was like, oh my goodness, it's happening already. So I took an Uber down there, strapped on my bulletproof vest, my bulletproof backpack, my gas mask, my ballistic helmet, literally inside the Uber. The Uber driver was obviously like, what is going on here?
Right.
I brought my skateboard knowing I was going to hit traffic. And once I did, I skateboarded down Independence Avenue the last mile. And my first thought when I showed up on that Western Front right at 2 p.m., right as the clashes were starting, I was like, why am I better prepared than all these cops? And so I think, what exactly happened as far as Trump requesting the troops, I guess we'll learn more about that now that Trump is going to take over as president again. With that being said, if I were to just take a guess, like, he asked for it. And if he really, 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 really wanted it and really pushed, as the president, he would be able to mobilize that. But, I think somebody on his team was probably like, your people are good people, and they're not going to do that. And on the other side of it, like, whoever it was, whether it was the chief of the Capitol Police or it was Mayor Bowser, who, she does have control over law enforcement in DC, or Congress oversees the Capitol Police. Whoever it was who decided what the security was going to be on the really kind of more granular granular level, I mean, I've seen abortion marches with more security than what was out there on that day. And by the time I got there, all of the barricades had been knocked over, moved out of the way. I even saw a sign that was like that said no trespassing that was flipped over into the grass. And so like if you're one of the people who was like, number 3,000 to show up to that police line, you wouldn't have seen any of that stuff because it was already gone by then.
Yeah.
And when you have like this pack mentality, who, the police were overwhelmed. So they went into panic mode. They started firing tear gas, pepper spray, billy clubs. And it only takes a couple of agitators to get one person billy clubbed, some pepper spray comes out, everybody in the surrounding area gets pepper sprayed. And everybody, once you get pepper spray in your eyes, I mean, I can attest to the fact that it turns on a different part of your brain. And so there's this total Lord of the Flies effect where everybody just goes primal. And when you have thousands of people, it's the police were bound to be overwhelmed, and I actually feel a fair degree of sympathy for the Capitol police officers. I think that from the right, they've gotten a lot of hate and anger, and by the time they were overrun on that Western Front, I actually was like literally based on the surveillance footage that I've been going through, the last person to get in the door on the Western Terrace, and it was like a cop was wrestling one guy. And another guy I had the footage is online on my Twitter, and I like ducked past them and went in the door. And I know that there are other instances where the cops, like there's showing the so-called Q shaman getting walked around by police. I mean, at that point, it's really hard for me to put myself into their shoes because they were so overwhelmed. And so I don't really place the blame on the Capitol Police per se, so much as whoever it was who was in charge of having like 100 and something officers in charge of securing the entire building when they knew what the numbers were going to be. And so my biggest question is, why was I better prepared than 90% of the police officers who were on the ground? Because they were getting pepper sprayed by people on the MAGA side and they were running away. And then the cops were pepper spraying the MAGA side and they were running away. And I was just in between with my gas mask and my ballistic helmet, like my hands are burning a little bit, but I'm just like, on a Sunday walk, like what is going on here? This is crazy. Just moseying between the two groups.
Who do you think Ray Epps is?
Well, I actually have Ray Epps in my footage. I realized after the fact that right when I arrived at the base of the inauguration tower, there was this big melee that was going on between a group of MAGA, it's safe to call these guys rioters because they were actively engaging with police, yanking the barricades down.
Sure.
And the cops were trying to retrieve the barricade, and there's this whole hubbub that was going on right in front of me, and Ray Epps was right in the background. And there was a tear gas canister that was deployed. There was a bunch of pepper spray that went off in that moment. And that was actually based on his testimony, the moment that he started to leave. So Ray Epps is in my footage. And the other thing I'll say is that on January 5th, when he was in front of the White House encouraging people in BLM Plaza, we got to go into the Capitol. We're going to have to go into the Capitol. I saw that show up because like we would get in the Antifa or the Proud Boys telegrams. Like we would go, I'd get kind of an anonymous photo of me and get in there and see the conversations that were going on for my own intelligence gathering purposes. And they were talking about, watch out for the feds the night before. Now, obviously, a bunch of the Proud Boys didn't, stay peaceful. That's for sure. That's like, I don't know, asking, I don't know, a bird to swim or something like that. I guess some birds do swim, so that's a bad analogy, but you see what I'm saying?
See what you're saying.
Fish out of water.
Right.
A Proud Boy acting like totally not totally peacefully. Like that's literally like in their whole entire credo is if they're gonna punch us, we're gonna punch them twice as hard. So the fact of the matter is that based on the intel that I had, I knew that things were gonna get violent at some point during that day. And why didn't the police have the same intelligence that just a reporter online had? And the last thing that was really crazy to me was when I showed up, the scaffoldings that were erected for the inauguration, also almost like I describe it as like a siege tower, because of the way that the scaffoldings were built, when they made that Western line, people were able to climb in up above the cops and around the cops and get in behind the line. And so it was an indefensible position. So it was almost like, it looked just by my own first thought when I got there. I was just like, this is impossible to defend. And that's why, because there's an open scaffolding where people can literally climb up over the line and around them.
Right. I think that Trump did not have the best people around him the first time he ran, and he trusted a lot of people that did not have his best interest at heart. It's amazing, like I said, he got anything done and got a lot of in my opinion, some good economic done. Both here in America and over in the Middle East, especially, and kept us out of wars. And so that's what obviously I hope that he's able to solve.
Got a lot on his plate now, obviously.
He does.
In Syria and Lebanon and Israel and the whole entire Mideast region, and not to mention Russia,
Right. I think he has better people around him this time. And hopefully, I agree with most of the choices that he's made, not every single one, but most of them, for his picks in his cabinet and, be involved with the administration. So I just hope there's some way, because it's so hard. Some people just don't want to listen and don't want to, because the truth that they've been told for so long, what they believe and perceive to be the truth, it's so hard for them to believe that maybe that wasn't the truth. And I know that I've gone through that, and I'm not saying that everything that I hear on what I watch or anything is 100% truthful. I believe there's some people at January 6th that deserve to go to jail. Then I also believe there's some that probably should have just gotten a misdemeanor in charge, and their whole life shouldn't have been.
I mean, that's undeniable. And, that's the same thing that happened during the BLM stuff, which was like the conservative side was only keen to pick out the most violent instances. But, when I went to Portland, there'd be 5,000 people out right around sunset. And then at midnight, there'd be 500. And so 1/10 of the group was basically at the center of everybody's attention. And, one side was saying mostly peaceful, which it was at one point, and the other side saying domestic terrorists, which in the case of people throwing, the few people who are throwing Molotov cocktails and the couple hundred people who are smashing into the fence specifically to draw the police out, that definitely they could be called rioters. But like the waters were muddied between the two in both the instance of January 6th and the BLM stuff, because of what we've been talking about, which is this bifurcated reflection on what took place.
Absolutely. I definitely have a few more questions to talk to you about with the book. And I knew this probably would happen, that I'd wanted to bring you back on to do part 3. If we can maybe schedule that sometime after the year. And then I know we'll, have you back on again once the other book comes out. I could tell you, in reading the book, one thing, and you sort of mentioned this earlier when you're talking about some people close to your family, it's extremely fascinating. When I was reading it, I really felt like I was standing right next to you, with you when you were involved in all these things, and like in that moment with you, not like where I was feeling scared, but to the way you describe everything in there, it's like I'm standing with you, watching you go through all these experiences, and that really shows. I mean, great writing. Yeah, I mean, you did a great job on this book.
That's really what I was trying to do, is like 20 years from now, put somebody into my shoes. And the one thing I'll say about that, I think journalists in the past didn't have the wealth of information that we have, not only just through the internet, but through the thousands of videos that I recorded with myself. So I'm rewatching these videos on my iPad, re-listening to them, and I'm like, oh man, I didn't realize that guy had a gun too. Oh man, I didn't realize how close I was there. Like, wow. And so, there's actually the hardest part in that instance isn't coming up with the words. It's coming up with, it's like you have a fire hose and you need to give people like it's just a steady stream that follows an actual story, a narrative timeline that's entertaining to read. And so I spent a lot of time trying to set the scene of these places. They all have their different flavors, whether it's the Chaz or the Occupy protests in New York. It's like they're, their own little cultural zone, their own little country. And, so I appreciate that a lot, because that was definitely one of the main goals of writing the book.
Yeah. And like I said, since I got it, I guess it's been about 10 days ago, every night, like even doesn't matter how tired I am, I'm reading, for at least 15 minutes up, and it is hard for me to put it down, but, I know that that's about my limit, each night before I go to bed. So
I appreciate that.
Great book here, everybody. I think Amazon, you can buy the paperback and Kindle, and anywhere else that they can get it.
Yeah, it's on Barnes and Noble now. Showed up on
Awesome.
there, and I'm on Ingram Spark, which is the wholesale retailer for bookstores. So you can just go to your local bookstore, support your local bookstore, and order it there. And I just got it. I got it up there, and just
Good for
ended up
you.
on Barnes and Noble today. So yeah,
Congratulations. That's unbelievable.
thank you. We're every day, one step at a time. I'm doing it on my own, so just figuring it out as I go. Fake it till you make it.
Absolutely. Well, Richie, thanks again for coming on today. I look forward to having you on after the new year, and have a really very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And I'll talk to you soon.
Likewise, thanks.
All right. Thank you.